Awesome. Thank you. Well, hello, good morning. My name is Emily Matlock. I am the communications coordinator for Beyond Toxics. It's a pleasure to have you all here with us today for Beneath the Pump, the Threat of Petroleum Contamination. That's our report, and we'll be discussing that along with the city's proposed gas station moratorium this morning. We've got Lisa Arkin, our executive director, and Mason Levitt here, our GIS coordinator, and they will give a quick presentation and we'll save plenty of time at the end of this meeting for questions. So we'll ask that you remain muted during the presentations, and at the end we'll open it up for questions. And so thank you for coming. We'll go ahead and we've got some communications folks on staff here. John is posting some links in the chat, so stay tuned for those. And we'll get started with a quick video just to give you all a visual of what we'll be talking about this morning. So Crystal, go ahead and take it away with the screen share. All right, thank you, Crystal. And I can see that people are still popping in. So if you just came in, we'll make sure to get you that video as soon as possible that we just shared. But Lisa, would you like to go ahead and take it away with a quick introduction?
Thank you, Emily, and welcome everyone. My name is Lisa Arkin, and I'm the Executive Director of Beyond Toxics. And the video we just showed, well, we can show it again at the end. It's only about 20 seconds long, but if you missed it, how will you want to miss it? So, as by way of introduction, I'd like to start off with saying that gas stations are a central figure of American life. We've all lived our lives with them. And gas stations in some ways remind us of things like family road trips and happy memories and the help we seek when our cars break down. However, this iconic feature is becoming increasingly obsolete. The current fossil fuel infrastructure and market for gasoline purchases may be unprofitable in as little as 15 years, according to the Boston Consulting Group. The economic argument is compelling. The next generation will be saddled with disposing of these stranded assets and the hazardous pollution that gas stations, both historically and presently, have wrought on our drinking water, our properties, and most important, our health. The Eugene City Council is scheduled to take up the issue of ending the proliferation of gas stations at a point when our transportation systems should be accommodating the exponential growth of electric cars and trucks. It makes no sense to expand gas station construction in Eugene. In just the past few years, in fact, 6 new gas stations have been constructed within our city limits. And the question at hand is, should Eugene give out permits to build more new gas stations? The proposal being considered this week by the City Council would not affect any current operations of existing gas stations, but would only help make Eugene do that necessary transition away from a transportation system that will soon no longer be dependent on selling fossil fuels and will be moving into a new age of electric transportation systems. I will soon turn this discussion over to Mason Levitt to expand upon 3 considerations that will necessitate the prompt adoption of policy changes to end new gas station construction. These 3 considerations are: 1, economic risks associated with decommissioning and cleaning up underground fuel storage tanks. 2, public health impacts associated with proximity to gas stations and exposure to their harmful vapors, and those from contaminated properties where gas stations have long since gone, but their polluting infrastructure remains. And three, making good on Eugene's commitment to meet its climate action plan goals and the responsibility to meet the needs of our future generation when it comes to averting a climate crisis. So thank you very much. And Mason, please take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Lisa. My name is Mason, and I work for Beyond Toxics as our GIS coordinator. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about some summary points from our most recent report, Beneath the Pump, the Threat of Petroleum Contamination. I am going to talk about some of the different emissions that come from gas stations, how they get into the environment and in the way of people, as well as some potential health impacts. I'm then going to discuss leaking underground storage tanks. Below all gas stations are a set of storage tanks that store the diesel and gasoline before they're dispensed into vehicles, and they often leak, and there are consequences of that. We're then going to summarize some of this information and look at the way that Eugene's transportation economy is changing and ways our city planners can take advantage of that change, and reduce public health risks from gas stations. So for a moment, I'd like you all to think back to the video that we opened up with at the beginning of this meeting. And using a forward-looking infrared camera, we were able to see some of the gasoline vapors that you smell while at the pump. Those vapors are benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene, collectively referred to as BTECs. There are many other pollutants that come from petroleum, but these are some of the most studied and most consequential. So that was one way that BTEX emissions get into the environment, was while we are transferring from the nozzle to the vehicle fuel tank. But the other ways that BTEX emissions passively emit from gas stations include permeation through microscopic holes in the hose pump. Little BTEX molecules can escape through this and end up in the environment. They also escape through spilling. In the video, you saw a couple of drops of gasoline spill onto the top of the entry to the vehicle tank, and several evaporative emissions come off of that. But they also do that when they end up on the ground in other places. Additionally, gasoline slowly evaporates in underground storage tanks, especially during the summer and hotter temperatures. And those emissions evaporate and travel through this pipeline and up out the processor and vents, which you can find as a common feature for every gas station. So gas stations emit benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene, or BTECs. And scientists have repeatedly documented higher concentrations of these chemical compounds the closer you are to a gas station. And the more gasoline is being put through a facility also increases that amount. They have also found that the more BTECs you are exposed to, the more likely you will have increased asthma symptoms, wheezing, develop or be diagnosed with asthma, especially for kids. They have also tied BTEX emissions to birth defects, cardiovascular performance, as well as cancer, especially from benzene, which is a known human carcinogen and causes blood cancer. These health effects play out in Eugene. Here we have a map of gas stations in Eugene, which are these little dots. Schools are also on here. And on the right, we have a couple of zoom ins to a couple of these specific areas. So along 18th, there is the 76 gas station and Buy 2 Fuel, which is near the Cesar Y. Chavez Elementary. Here is the playground for the park. And these little black polygons are different residential houses within 500 feet of a gas station. And scientists have repeatedly recorded high concentrations of benzene that put kids at risk for cancer, especially within 500 feet. So currently, our city's land use and zoning laws permit houses and gas stations to be built really close next to each other. The most recent example of this, which is Everyone's Market, which was recently constructed at the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023 around several residential houses. But there are other gas stations in the area of the Bethel neighborhood that are closely located to schools and school grounds, and especially roads where kids will be walking on to school. But the real danger, public health hazard of gas stations comes when they leak. These underground storage tanks store diesel and gasoline, and eventually, over time, the barriers around the storage tank deplete and leak. They are also known to leak where the nozzle connects to the pipe and that pipe connects to the underground storage tank. Some of those connections weaken over time and end up leaking petroleum into the environment. So this graphic explains how leaking underground storage tanks increase exposure to toxic molecules like BTEX. So here we have our source right here, and there is a slow leach of gasoline, and that is producing this orange shape of what is called free product or BTEX molecules seeping through the groundwater and soil. Right here, we have some more direct exposure. We have a kid playing in some water and some soil that is contaminated with petroleum from this source. But also through that, we have a lot of that petroleum toxins becoming airborne in the form of vapors and dust emissions. And those blow and become part of the ambient air nearby gas stations and leaking underground storage tank, exposing people who are running and interacting nearby. Below here, we see that the petroleum has leaked into the groundwater table and is affecting the groundwater well that supplies this house with drinking water and water for bathing and other purposes. So this is another potential exposure pathway through which BTEX can get in the groundwater and get into people's homes. It's also worth noting that it can volatilize from here and become airborne and infiltrate buildings in here as well. Here we have it leaking into a stream, which again is being used for sprinklers and irrigation purposes and ends up in this case on someone recreating, but could also end up in our food and other things. So leaking petroleum and freeborn product are especially dangerous. They expose nearby workers and residents to toxins. They also decrease property values for commercial, industrial, and residential properties nearby because this petroleum contamination is a health hazard and often has to be cleaned up. Since this house now has its water supply well infected with petroleum, that makes this remediation effort for this house particularly expensive and the house harder to sell to a following owner. These leaks for gas stations are incredibly expensive to clean up. An average cost of cleanup is about $400,000. So in the case of this particular instance, that $400,000 would cover the costs of environmental consultants, the removal of this contaminated soil, and in this case, it would actually cost probably a lot more than $400,000 because there have been direct impacts to drinking water. But let's say that a consultant comes in here and cleans up on site and leaves a little bit of contamination behind, perhaps by accident. This would in turn burden future development that might come into the area. And we're going to ground ourselves with an example that recently happened in Eugene. We're going to be using the 515 Broadway apartments as an example. So as you come down the Ferry Street Bridge across the Willamette River, you see this big apartment building on the left. It has the big yellow box on it, and that's how we all know it. So believe it or not, very shortly, just over a decade ago, the 515 apartments was the site of a Chevron gas station. And this gas station had a huge leak happen below it. In order to clean up all of this petroleum contamination, consultants and construction workers had to excavate 12 vertical feet of soil into the ground to remove petroleum contaminated soil that totaled over 50 dump trucks loads worth. Those loads were then transported and placed in the Short Mountain landfill, where they will sit there in an environment that is less likely to expose people to those toxins. Even after doing this, they had to flush the open hole with several million gallons of groundwater in order to clean out all of the petroleum contamination from surrounding land and water. They then dumped that water in the city's sewers, which ended up eventually in the Willamette River. So this is kind of what a petroleum contamination excavation removal might look like. This is for a different site in Eugene, located currently where Sequential Biofuels along Franklin Boulevard is on the way to Lane County Community College. So this is what a soil cleanup looks like, and this is what happened at the 515 site. Now, even after all of this cleanup and all of these used resources to be able to clean the area of contamination, the DEQ said there was too much contamination still remaining at the site to allow residential buildings to be built there. Unfortunately, Core Campus, a student apartment developer, had already bought the site and wanted to build the 515 apartments at it. They contacted DEQ and said, would it be okay for us to construct the apartments if we didn't put any residential units in the bottom floor? The DEQ acquiesced and said that would be okay, but they didn't require any follow-up airborne detection of BTEX in the ground floor or of upper floors of the apartment to verify that these levels of exposure were healthy. Not to mention, I'd like to point out that workers and other people frequently interact in the bottom floors. So just by removing residential units does not mean that we remove the possibility of public health harm and exposure to toxic molecules. All right, so this is one case in Eugene. It's worth noting that there have been 303 instances of leaking underground storage tanks in Eugene since 1987 alone. I should also say that the number is likely higher than that because these were the records we were able to get from the Department of Environmental Quality. Some records may not have been digitized and be publicly available so easily. 114 of those 303 cleanups are still not finished and actively underway. 43 of those leaking underground storage tanks threatened groundwater drinking wells. 41 threatened the Willamette River, and several dozen more threatened the Amazon Creek, Mill Race, and McKenzie rivers. Over here, we have a map of all of these leaking underground storage instances at the time. The year the leak was detected affects the color, and then the size is based on the capacity of the tank leaking. So with that, I have very briefly summarized some of the dangerous health hazards of gas stations and what happens when they leak. And that is reason enough alone to reconsider how and where we place gas stations in when thinking about our city's land use. However, we have a wonderful opportunity ahead of us. In 2035, the Eugene Water and Electric Board predicts that 64 to 80% of passenger cars on Eugene roads will be electric. And because of that, the Boston Consulting Group predicts that up to 80% of gas stations will be unprofitable in cities like Eugene. Not to mention the state of Oregon, the state of California, and many other states, as well as automakers, have all come out and said that they will no longer be producing any gasoline vehicles in 2035. So the electrification revolution is well underway, which is great news for the city's climate goals and our efforts to fight climate change. But it also should help us think about the way we might think about our land use in the future. So on the right, we have a map of all of Eugene's 56 gas stations that are spread across the city. And around each of them is a buffer representing what a 5-minute drive's worth of access looks like. So in the case of our Everyone's Market, everyone in this area can likely access the gas station within a 5-minute drive. As you can see, everyone in the city has access to a gas station. Some of them in the center have access to 20. We have enough gas stations to last us until 2035 and to meet current demand. Now, the question is, is, do we want more public health hazards and more chronic benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene emissions in our environment, and the risk of more leaks that we have to clean up? As an organization, we would argue that that is probably not the best choice, and that protecting our environment and public health is an excellent goal, especially amid the reality that we will not need this much gasoline in the future, much less anymore. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa for some concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Mason. So in 2021, the city of Petaluma, California, became the first city to actually ban the new construction of gas stations. And since then, 4 more cities have followed suit and have prohibited gas station construction permanently. And at least 6 more are set to follow, including the city of Los Angeles, which is now considering a ban on new gas station construction. So can we in Eugene take note? And can we also move in this positive direction? The economic incentives for electrical vehicles provided by the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, is really changing public attitudes about mobility and transportation planning. And the heightened urgency for climate action will require a fundamental transformation of vehicle refueling business models. So in conclusion, the following policy reforms are offered, which can set Eugene on a path toward transportation planning that manages the future decline of fossil fuels and moves us beyond environmental and public health damage. So we are recommending disallowing construction of new gas stations in Eugene, sorry for the typo there, building out a network of electric vehicle charging stations throughout our city, and supporting a citywide electric vehicle charging master plan. This shouldn't be haphazardly done. We need to plan it out and map where we want new EV charging stations to go. And also, we advise that we require electric vehicle charging stations at existing gas stations and building up our capacity to fuel cars in whatever way they need, taking into account that in just a few years, as much as 80% of our vehicles will be run by electricity. So we'll close with these recommendations and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Lisa and Mason. I just wanted to say that there were a couple of questions in the chat about getting these slides out to you, and I will absolutely follow up with an email getting all of this information out to everyone who's attended, as well as a recording of the press conference if you would like one. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself. You can raise your hand or just pipe up, whatever works for you. We're not picky. Nathan.
Hi. So obviously, Eugene, in this past year has tried to implement another restriction on gas pollution here in the city. And although that was ultimately defeated by a legal precedent, obviously there was that pushback from Northwest Natural in trying to encourage and move forward with a moratorium or a ban on new gas stations. Do you anticipate any pushback from those companies? And if so, what role, if any, does Beyond Toxics play in fighting that pushback?
I could start with that. Thank you. We are supportive of the City Council's efforts to disallow the use of natural gas hookups for new construction for residential homes and multifamily housing 3 stories or less. And, you know, we all have to wait on the Ninth Circuit Court to see where those decisions will land in a legal sense. But we can do as much as we can now to incentivize homeowners to make the switch from gas infrastructure to electrical appliances, you know, HVAC systems, stoves, things like that. And again, with the incentives offered by EWEB, by the state of Oregon, and by our federal government, making that transformation will become more economical for more households.
I
Did I
see.
answer your question?
I'm sorry. I think I confuse. I guess just with that as background context of that pushback from Northwest Natural, when you're looking at this issue now, as related to these gas stations, is there, do you anticipate similar pushback from these gas stations, from these companies, from the industry? And if so, will you play any role in trying to get this action moved forward despite that?
Yes, thank you. And I apologize if I misunderstood. It's a dying industry. They are pushing back. The fossil fuel companies are suing the state of Oregon right now to undermine the Oregon Climate Protection Program. Will there be pushback? Probably so. I want to reiterate that the current proposal does not impact current gas stations. It's a ban on future construction of gas stations due to the changing economics and our realization of health problems. And yes, Beyond Toxics will absolutely be supporting our city to stand up to any kind of misinformation or greenwashing campaign from fossil fuel industries.
Right, Nathan, I see you have a follow-up.
This is just a point of clarification. A couple times you've mentioned the building of, I think it was 6 new gas stations in the past few years. Can you clarify what the past few years actually means? Are we talking about a decade here? Are we talking about 3 years? What more specifically is that timeline?
Thank you. The staff report that is in the city council packet says since 2018. So at least that, it seems like a shorter period of time to me, but at least that. And someone asked for a link to the city's, well, it says support. We can send a link to the Eugene City Council packet for the Wednesday work session. The work session is at noon this Wednesday. They have published the packet and you can read the staff's report and recommendations there. And I'll try to grab that for you. Alan has a question. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So building off Nathan's question there, you said there are 5 cities that have already done this. Have any of them faced legal challenges?
No. Because this is, it would be changing our land use code, our zoning codes. So in our report on the last page before the citations, you'll see a chart of our zoning code there and our recommendation that in the places where currently in code gas stations are allowed, such as community commercial, we just simply remove the permission to build gas station from those areas. So it'd be in community neighborhood areas, community commercial, and I gotta look at
Share it.
neighborhood commercial, community commercial, major commercial, and general office zoning codes.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know if you're able to speak on this, but at that work session tomorrow, they're also going to be discussing the public health overlay zone. Well, not technically that, but what evolved from that. And when I was reading like the earlier draft that you suggested, gas stations were included there. Like, do you know why that was pulled as its own separate item?
I don't know exactly why. Maybe because the public health overlay zone was also very much focused on industrial zoning. But I can't speak for the city.
Yeah, I guess, that's probably a question for the city. Thank you.
And I just put in the chat the link to the council packet.
I apologize if you already touched on this, Mason, but when a gas station is abandoned, as could possibly happen here with the electric vehicle industry growing, does that make it more likely for a leak to happen?
It doesn't make it necessarily more likely for a leak to happen, but that is typically when leaks are found. So if they exist, they're going to be found when they're decommissioned. And this is especially likely in the next decade as the first set of laws and regulations by the EPA for leaking underground storage tanks went into effect in the 1990s. And a lot of tank manufacturers responded with a new tank design, but they placed a 30-year warranty on it, saying after 30 years, this thing is going to be really likely to leak, and we're no longer going to cover it with a manufacturer warranty. So we're in the 2020s. It's been 30 years since the 90s, and we're incredibly likely to come up against that and see that happen, especially as we decommission these sites. And I would say the riskier thing is the financing for cleaning them up as these industries go out of business and no longer become profitable. Coming up with the money to make sure that those polluters pay and have the money to pay to clean it up becomes an increasingly difficult challenge.
And so it is generally their liability if a gas station is decommissioned to pay for that. It's not on the city.
It's in most scenarios in the state of Oregon, gas stations prove financial competence through third-party insurance. However, this is not the case for all of them. They can also say, we'll pay for it ourselves, which won't happen if they have to file for bankruptcy, or they'll at least have to pay as much as they can. And some cities do provide actual financial backing for a cleanup for a gas station if the gas station can't find its own financial resources. So it's a case-by-case scenario, but the majority of gas stations get insurance, and that's usually what cleans it up. I would note with the example cleanups that we brought up today and the ones in the report that they are often imperfect and do not fully clean up a site and burden future developers with further cleanup and safety standards that are often expensive to pay for and will not be borne by the polluter.
Thanks so much.
In our report, there's a detailed discussion of the cleanup situation on 17th between Oak and Willamette Streets in downtown Eugene. And I recommend you read that section, the area right behind the Les Schwab Tire Center. Would anyone like, oh, I was going to say we could also play the video again, but Alan has a question.
I mean, you can play the video if you want, but I guess the question I want to ask, admittedly, I haven't read the packet yet, but the question I want to ask you, you mentioned there were some studies tying gas stations to health risk. Like what research exactly are you citing that I could hopefully look up?
Yeah, so it's not, again, highly recommend reading the report. We have all of that cited in there.
Okay.
So what I looked at is I looked at research that showed that BTEX is higher the closer you get to a gas station. And then separately, there is a huge field that looks at ambient concentrations of BTEX and how they correlate with increased symptoms like asthma, decreased cardiovascular function, et cetera. And then I looked and compared those studies and found that the range of BTEX emissions are the same, right? So the same findings that they found near gas stations are frequently ambient concentrations that lead to these health outcomes. And so all of that is available in the report. There's also a couple of really excellent studies that compare houses adjacent to gas stations to houses further away and found increased amounts of childhood cancer for kids living in houses next to gas stations. And that is a very clean one where the measurements and the health outcome are in one place. But most of the time, the research is conducted in these two silos. And so in the report, we bridge that for you all, but there's citations in there.
I would just add to that as Mason mentioned, it's ambient concentrations, but also concentrations within homes can be increased because, you know, the air is entering through open windows or HVAC systems, fans, whatever. So there's mention of those studies in the report as well.
Yeah, one molecule I didn't talk about is MTBE, which is short for a really long chemical name I can't remember off the top of my head. But that molecule is really unique to gasoline, and it's added as an oxidative. So we know it can be traced back to gasoline really cleanly, unlike BTEX, which can come from carpets and these other things that make some of these studies difficult. But because MTBE is unique to gas stations, they were able to track this. And what they found is that there was an increase in concentration of MTBE the closer you were to a gas station, whether you were indoors or outdoors.
Let's show that video again if there's no pressing question. I think it's a great idea. And you want to zoom in. Yeah. So we can narrate it as we go since there's no sound. So here's opening the gas tank, and you'll see the camera is able to pick up the volatile organic compounds, that BTEX, as sort of black vapors. You see the vapors coming off the drips right there, and then you see it escaping out the gas tank as the person who's fueling is leaning over. These are the things that are being released from those fumes into the ambient air. And that footage was taken with a FLIR camera that Mason can tell you the model and capabilities of if you wish to know. And remember from the graphic that Mason showed it, those kind of vapors are also leaking from the hose itself, from the vents, from the processor, from other drips. There's about 5 or 6 areas where they leak right from the gas station all the time, basically. Any other questions? Oh, Alan.
I mean, I don't want to hog the questions if anyone else has any, but is another thing I wanted to know. You mentioned 515 Willamette. It's like in general, if a site used to be a gas station and then that gas station goes out of business or closes for whatever reason, what can you not do at that site that you could do if it was not previously a gas station?
So just to clarify, we're talking about 515 Broadway, not
Broadway, not Willamette.
yeah, no worries, just for everyone else. So this is such a case by case scenario. There are different thresholds of concentrations for different types of land uses. So the DEQ will occasionally prohibit a type of land use at a site, depending where it is in with the city. And they use this term called locality of the facility to describe sort of what land uses and types of environments are around this facility and what type of exposure pathways are likely. So in the case of 515, it is a mix of residential and commercial purposes. So they figured that a residential property was possible in the area through the city's zoning code and decided to prohibit that because there was still enough BTEX molecules in groundwater and soil to intrude into buildings through what's called vapor intrusion, when these molecules go from a water and soil state to an airborne state and permeate through the soil into buildings. And so that's why they decided that a buffer of a first floor might be enough to reduce the risk in theory.
I'd like to add one more consideration, which we do cover in our report. The process for public input is pretty fraught in this kind of permitting process that the city goes through. In the case of the Everyone's Market on Barger, Avenue very like sharing property lines with residential properties. The first step was for the owner to apply for a rezone from a neighborhood. It was up on our sheet there for a second, but oh, I always forget the name. Neighborhood
Commercial, neighborhood
commercial.
commercial. Yeah.
Thank you. To community commercial. And just that zoning change doesn't really alert the neighborhood, the nearby residents, teachers, to the plan to perhaps put a gas station in, because it's not really common knowledge that a gas station can be constructed in a community commercial zone. So when people nearby inquired about the potential of a gas station, they were told that comment was not relevant to the zoning change. The zoning change was made, and then when those nearby residents protested the construction of a gas station, they were told their comment was not relevant. Again, because gas stations are allowed in that zoning that zoning area. So in both cases, public comment was dismissed and ignored or told deemed to be irrelevant. And so the gas station has been built. We also find that many of these permits are coming in as 7-Eleven convenience stores, and that's the way the permit is listed in the city's records, and it's not emphasizing the fact that perhaps as many as 12 or 16 pumps will be included in that construction.
All right, thank you, Lisa and Mason. Do we have any other questions? We're a little bit past our time, so can wrap up if needed, but I'm gonna put my name and contact information in the chat. You can follow up with me if you have any questions. Alan, go for it.
So sorry, one last question. If so, you talk about this these projections that gas stations are dying like anyway. So why is this needed? Why not just let the market handle it?
That is because, you know, the market's not going to account for these types of environmental damages super efficiently, right? People often build these gas stations and then resell them. So that's something else we looked at through the city's records, is it's often the same developer going and building a gas station and then turning around and selling it in the year. So the developer is seeking to make a profit just by building the gas station itself, not investing in the long-term profits of a facility. So that person wins, and then the buyer of it is going to be faced with 10 years down the line. More likely than not, their gas station is going to be unprofitable. We can certainly do this. It just means more cleanups and more public health hazards in the meantime. And as a city, we can embrace these market trends and proactively plan and manage for them. And that will lead to better public health outcomes.
Also, we believe it will lead to better economic outcomes, because you can if you get ahead of the game now, if you look into the future and think we're going to take action proactively, those gas station sites can be repurposed. They can be repurposed with electrical vehicle recharging stations, restaurants, more places for motorists to come and rest or get online or have a little pocket park nearby. We can make them actually community spaces where people can sit for 20 minutes and get a meal or take their dog for a walk. I mean, we can re-envision these places, but we should not be allowing additional construction of a polluting industry that is turning out to be obsolete in the near term. We're not talking 40 years out, we're talking 15 years out. Also, remember the map that Mason showed that of the 56 gas stations already in Eugene, everyone can reach one in 5 minutes or less. And in most cases can reach multiple gas stations in 5 minutes or less. So the question is, why allow these developers who are looking to make a quick buck come to our community, because we just haven't thought ahead to protect our own property, protect our own health, and protect our future generations not to have to deal with these brownfields. You know, in the United States, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, there are 450,000 brownfields, most of them from leaking old gas stations.
Yeah, Alan.
Yeah, sorry, sorry to keep holding that. What's a brownfield?
Oh, thank you for asking. A brownfield is a site that has some kind of chemical contamination on it, and is not suitable for a new construction project until those environmental contaminants are cleaned up. So an example we all know about in our own community is the J.H. Baxter wood preservative plant. Now that it's no longer in business, it is becoming, or is already maybe, a brownfield where nothing can be built on that site until there's a massive cleanup. And there are many brownfields around Eugene, and the city is always applying for grants from the EPA to, they're called brownfield redevelopment grants, to try to get money to deal with these brownfields. Some of them have been abandoned, some of them are still owned, and the owner can't afford to do the cleanup. So again, it eventually is taxpayer dollars that are necessary to take care of the massive costs of brownfield cleanups. The city of Eugene has received a couple of brownfield redevelopment grants.
Yeah, we actually talk about one in the report for the current site of sequential biofuels. That unfortunately new gas station was constructed over the site of a former gas station that left a brownfield. And because the former owner had gone bankrupt and was unable to pay for the cleanup, the city and new developer and the state had to work together to pay to redevelop the site.
Great questions. All these are great questions. So Alan, you're doing a great job of, diving in deep. So thank you.
With that, are there any further questions? We can let folks go. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, my contact information is in the chat. If you'd like to reach out or have any follow-up questions, I can send a recording of the press conference later this afternoon as well. If you'd be interested, we'll post it on our website, I think, too. But yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any other questions or concerns or comments, and we will let everyone get on with their day. Thank you, Lisa and Mason, for presenting and sharing. And thank you everyone for being here and learning with us today.